Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back in time to a world where dairy is dicey, food safety is theoretical, and the cheese on your plate might actually be plotting your demise. Imagine yourself standing in the misty twilight of a medieval village, somewhere vaguely European, vaguely damp. There's a goat bleating nearby, someone is churning something suspicious in a wooden bucket, and the air smells faintly of herbs, straw, and what can only be described as aggressive curd. You've arrived in an era where cheese is more than a snack, it's a gamble you probably won't survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the village square, where cheese wheels the size of car tires are being hoisted onto carts like medieval treasure. No refrigeration, no FDA, just optimism and a little hope that no one dies from what's inside. You overhear a barter between a cloaked merchant and a woman holding a suspiciously fuzzy round of goat cheese. He swears it's been sun-aged for 6 weeks. She looks skeptical, and you're beginning to wonder if you've wandered into a dairy-themed fever dream. See, cheese in the Middle Ages isn't the cozy charcuterie experience we know today. It's survival food, battlefield rations, religious offering, and possibly the reason your cousin didn't make it past Tuesday. The average peasant might eat cheese daily, but the cheese doesn't always return the favor kindly. Your body is essentially playing a microbial roulette with every bite. And what's more, cheese isn't the same from place to place. In England they wrap it in cloth and age it near a fireplace. In France, monks lovingly flip it by hand every few days while chanting prayers. In Italy, well, if you ever find yourself chewing something rubbery and pungent and no one will tell you what animal it came from, just stop chewing. Still, cheese is a gift, a miracle. A way to trap summer's abundance in a waxy rind and drag it kicking and screaming into winter. Milk doesn't last, but cheese is immortal, or at least it pretends to be right up until the moment it betrays you. You step inside a humble cottage, where an old woman is grating something onto a pot of bubbling barley. Careful, she warns, only a little, too much and your dreams turn black. You chuckle politely, assuming she's joking. She is not. Medieval people aren't just cautious with food, they're superstitious. That lump of cheese isn't merely aged dairy, it's a living, breathing, possibly enchanted entity. One wrong move, and it becomes either a healing tonic or a digestive apocalypse. And yes, people actually believed cheese had moods. Some said cheese could absorb the emotional energy of the household. Angry cheese curdled faster. Happy cheese, creamier, apparently. Historians still argue whether this belief originated in actual observed changes, or was just the result of collective mold-induced delirium. You take a seat near the hearth, watching the shadows flicker across the stone walls. The village elder begins telling a tale, half legend, half local memory, of a shepherd who once aged his cheese in a hollowed-out log. The cheese began to sprout blue-green veins, and everyone assumed it was cursed, until one brave soul ate it, lived and declared it delicious. Thus Roquefort may or may not have been born. That's the thing about cheese history, it's mostly speculation, shaped by oral traditions, fever dreams, and the occasional written account smeared with grease. Out in the fields, you spot children swinging sacks of herbs over curd-filled pails, trying to flavor their cheese before it hardens into something unrecognizable. Lavender, thyme, even crushed garlic find their way into these concoctions. Not for taste. Well, not only for taste, but because certain herbs are believed to ward off cheese spirits. That's right, cheese spirits. You thought lactose intolerance was bad, try having your soul possessed by a moldy wheel of cow's milk. As the sun dips below the hills, you follow a trail of villagers carrying baskets of cheese to the local tavern. Tonight is cheese night, an informal festival where everyone brings their ripest wheel and tries not to fall ill before morning. There's dancing, poorly tuned lute music, and a drinking game involving fermented mare's milk. You take a small bite from a platter passed your way. It tastes oddly of smoke, hay and betrayal. A man beside you leans in and confides, "My cousin once ate a whole round of that stuff. Couldn't feel his arms for 3 days." He laughs. You do too, nervously. Just as the party hits its peak, someone keels over. The music pauses for a second, then resumes slightly louder. No one wants to admit what they're all thinking. The cheese has claimed another. You glance around and realize something strange. No one here uses cutlery with cheese. It's all torn, scooped, scraped with wooden chips. There's a reason. Blades rust. Rust means contamination. Contamination means death. Every part of cheese consumption, from slicing to storage, is a subtle survival test. You're being evaluated by dairy. Outside the tavern, under the moonlight, you spot rows of wheels on a wooden shelf, aging, sweating, alive. They stare back. You go to sleep that night on a straw mat, stomach bubbling, dreams swirling with visions of cheese rounds chasing you through a foggy forest. The first rule of medieval cheese: don't trust it. You wake with a start. A rooster screams in the distance like it's seen something unspeakable. Your stomach feels negotiable, but you're alive, so perhaps the cheese decided to spare you for now. Outside, the village is already awake, and there's a line forming outside the stone monastery on the hill. Today is market day, and the monks are selling cheese. This is no ordinary peasant curd. They've got the good stuff. The cheese that's been blessed, aged in damp cellars, and rotated precisely every other Tuesday by a monk named Benedict, who hasn't spoken in 14 years. You trudge up the hill with the others, following the scent of lactic ambition. Monasteries were the 5-star cheese labs of medieval Europe. These weren't your average holes-in-the-ground dairies. They were cool, controlled, and just the right level of eerie. Dark stone corridors, stacks of aging wheels on wooden planks, and the faint chant of Gregorian hymns bouncing off the limestone walls. These monks weren't just men of God, they were microbiologists in robes. They didn't know the word bacteria, but they knew that if you kept the cellar at the right temperature and humidity, something magical, possibly divine, would happen. You pass under a carved archway and enter the monastery's aging room. It's cool and damp. The air smells of wet stone, hay, and that peculiar tang that only emerges when milk has been left to contemplate its sins for 6 months. A young monk walks past holding a wheel the size of a wagon wheel, wrapped in cloth and speckled with a fur coat of white mold. You politely decline the urge to scream. One mainstream historical fact: the Benedictine and Cistercian monks in medieval Europe were some of the earliest consistent producers of aged cheeses. They documented techniques, shared starter cultures, and even passed on secret recipes between abbeys like they were state secrets. Still, things went wrong. Sometimes the cheese split open in the cellar, oozing a dark liquid that no one could explain. Sometimes the mold turned pink. That was never a good sign, but the monks persevered, sometimes believing the cheese itself was offering penance, transforming from the raw sin of milk into a holy food. Not quite communion, but close enough. But here's where it gets weird. According to one lesser-known manuscript, a particular monastery in what's now southern Germany once banned women from entering the cheese cellars because it was believed that their gaze alone could sour the rind. Historians still argue whether this was based on religious superstition, early attempts at quality control, or simply deeply medieval misogyny, likely a rich fondue of all three. You glance at a cheese wheel resting under a cloth soaked in ale. Yes, ale. That was a common practice, washing cheese in beer, wine, or even brine laced with herbs. It created a protective rind and flavored the interior. But it also, occasionally, created an environment ripe for less savory residents. Worms, mites, and other little uninvited guests would sometimes burrow in. You'd think that would be a deal breaker, but no. In some cases it was considered a sign of a truly alive cheese. You just flicked the critters off and carried on. No one had invented squeamishness yet. You're offered a sample. It's soft, aromatic, and slightly alarming. You chew slowly, bracing for divine enlightenment or intestinal rebellion. So far so good. The monk explains with a gleam in his eye that this cheese was aged for exactly 73 days, flipped every third day, and bathed in silence. You're not sure what that last part means, but nod respectfully. The reverence is real. In a world where food could rot, spoil, or straight up murder you, cheese was a miracle. A controlled decay, an edible paradox, and yet for all their holy cheesecraft, monks still got sick. Entire batches would go bad, visitors would keel over. Sometimes it was blamed on bad air, or an unblessed cellar. Other times demons, always demons. Demons loved cheese apparently. You hear rumors of a monk who claimed a particularly aggressive rind whispered his name at night. He left the monastery and took up fishing. Back outside you watch peasants barter for slices of the sacred cheese. Some trade herbs, others offer eggs, and one ambitious lad offers his younger brother. The monks refuse, of course, but take a hen instead. And now, you witness one of the strangest things yet. A woman produces a wooden amulet, round, carved with curdled symbols, and holds it over her cheese before slicing. She whispers a blessing to Saint Brigid, patroness of dairymaids. Whether this actually keeps the cheese safe or is just a habit passed down from generations of nervous ancestors is unclear. But you notice something: no one eats cheese here casually. Every bite carries the weight of history, risk and ritual. There's even a local superstition that if your cheese cracks into 3 pieces, you'll have bad luck until the wheel is finished, and if it hisses when you cut into it, best to bury it at a crossroads and walk away. The sun climbs higher as you carry your own modest wedge down the hill, wrapped in cloth and a little prayer. As you walk, you reflect on the utter absurdity of it all. This food, this funky, mysterious, sometimes literally dangerous food is cherished, protected, perfected, and not despite the risk, but maybe because of it. By the time you reach the edge of the village, a distant bell rings and a dog starts barking at your cheese. You walk a little faster. Tonight you'll taste it, but not yet. First you need to build a fire, say a small prayer, and maybe talk to someone about that hissing sound the monk's sample made when you poked it. Because in the world of medieval cheese, ignorance isn't bliss, it's botulism. Back at your modest hut, you unwrap the cheese and place it gently on a wooden board like it's a sleeping animal. The fire crackles behind you, casting soft amber light across the room, and you try not to think about all the ways cheese has killed people over the centuries. Just eat around the greenish bit, they say. But what if the greenish bit eats back? The wedge in front of you is semi-soft, with a bloomy rind that looks like it might be breathing. It's the kind of cheese that seems to have an inner life. You remember the monk's warning: let it sit out before you cut it. Wake it up gently. You do as instructed. You wait, you stare, you wonder if it's staring back. In medieval times, cheese didn't come shrink-wrapped with expiration dates or helpful allergy warnings. You had to trust your senses and your instincts. You learned the difference between good stinky and bad stinky, between a nutty funk and the scent of something fermenting its way toward a lawsuit. And if you guessed wrong, well, you probably wouldn't make that mistake again, or anything again. One mainstream historical fact: food poisoning from dairy was a legitimate concern in the Middle Ages. Without pasteurization, thanks Louis Pasteur, but you're still centuries away. Cheese could harbor Listeria, Salmonella, and a lovely little number called Clostridium botulinum. You know, the one that paralyzes you from the inside out. Yet somehow people survived. Not all of them, but enough. And those who did developed an almost superstitious relationship with cheese. You slice into the wedge, half expecting it to sigh. It doesn't. That's either a good sign or a very bad one. The inside is creamy, pale, and veined with something that might be mold, or might be the promise of enlightenment. You taste it. It's delicious, earthy, tangy, slightly unsettling, like a good ghost story told with food. Outside your window you hear a distant shout. The baker's son apparently ate some cheese left out in the sun and is now seeing angels, or chickens with halos. Either way, it's a learning moment for the village. You think back to the peasant cures for bad cheese. Some swore by drinking vinegar after eating a questionable bite. Others chewed on wormwood or mashed garlic. A few even believed you should rub your belly counterclockwise while singing a hymn. Historians still argue whether these practices were based on real effects, placebo, or pure superstition. Likely all three, like most medieval medicine. Of course people didn't just eat cheese, they used it. You've heard of poultices made from curd pressed onto boils or wounds, because why not? It smelled healing. And sometimes cheese was used as a test, a kind of medieval pregnancy indicator. If milk curdled when mixed with a woman's urine, it was said she might be expecting. Science, no. Resourceful, absolutely. The smell of your own cheese has deepened now, intensifying in the warmth. There's a slight ammonia note but nothing tragic. You wrap it back up for later and open the door for some air. In the village square, gossip swirls. Someone found a wheel of cheese buried behind the granary. It's old, possibly decades, and no one's sure if it's a treasure or a weapon. The elders decide to burn it just in case. You nod quietly. Sometimes cheese is best left buried. There's also talk of a traveling merchant who claims to have cheese from the east, spiced, hard as stone, doesn't smell like feet. People are skeptical. That's not what cheese is supposed to be like, they say. Cheese is supposed to challenge you, make you question your decisions. You stroll toward the tavern where a hunk of hard yellow cheese sits behind the counter like a forgotten idol. It's been there so long it's practically part of the architecture, but it's still technically edible. The barkeep offers you a slice free because no one else will touch it. It tastes like regret and walnut shells. You thank him anyway. The tavern's fireplace is roaring, and a farmer tells the story of his uncle who once found a cheese with a tiny bone in it. No one's sure how it got there. A rat? A curse? A monk's mistake? The cheese was buried in a churchyard just to be safe. You return home under a soft blue sky streaked with smoke from cooking fires. Your own cheese waits patiently. You wrap it in a bit of linen and place it in a cool corner. You don't have a cellar, so you hope that the spirits of the monks will watch over it. As you settle onto your cot, the air thick with twilight, you can't help but marvel at the daily gamble that is medieval eating. Every bite is a minor miracle, every meal a test of faith and fortitude. It's amazing anyone survived long enough to invent dessert, and yet they did. They didn't just survive, they got bold. They invented new cheeses, traded wheels across regions. Some cheeses were so valuable they were taxed or used in dowries. Imagine offering your future spouse 2 cows, a goat, and a rather assertive wheel of alpine hard cheese. Romance. Thy name is lactose. The fire crackles lower. You lie back, head full of cheese dreams and half warnings. Tomorrow you'll eat more. You'll test the edge. You'll learn slowly how to dance with decay. But for now your stomach is quiet, the cheese is calm, and no one is hallucinating poultry. That's what counts. The sun rises late and lazy, dragging itself over the thatched rooftops like it too had one too many spoonfuls of curdled dreams last night. You yawn and stretch, mildly surprised to wake up not only alive but also without the telltale stomach knots that usually signal an impending sprint to the village latrine. The cheese hasn't killed you. Yet. A small victory. Today's plan involves venturing beyond the village toward the next town's market. Word has spread of a cheesemonger passing through, someone who legend claims possesses a rind-washing technique learned from a blind shepherd in the Pyrenees, which is either a heartwarming tale of cross-cultural dairy exchange, or just a fantastic excuse for cheese that smells like wet goat. You grab a satchel and pack your remaining wedge of yesterday's survivor cheese, wrapped tightly in linen. You think of it as a sort of edible talisman now. If it lived, so can you. As you walk, the road crunches underfoot with frost-bitten dirt. A distant crow laughs like it knows what's coming. You pass by fields dusted with the ash of early winter, empty save for the occasional peasant poking the ground with a stick like it owes them money. It's about a 2-hour journey to the market, which gives you time to reflect on the more curious roles cheese has played in the medieval imagination. Sure, it was food, but it was also folklore. There's that apocryphal tale of Saint Hildegard insisting that only pure cheese made by virgins could cure melancholy. Historians still argue whether this was meant literally or was just an early attempt at controlling the local dating pool. You reach the outer edges of the market. Wooden stalls creak as vendors arrange their goods, spices, wool, suspiciously crusty meat pies. You catch the unmistakable scent of cheese long before you see it. It hits you like a wall, earthy, pungent, vaguely floral, vaguely threatening. And there he is, the cheesemonger. He's hunched, wrapped in a cloak stitched together from various patches of waxed linen and questionable leather. On his cart sit wheels and wedges and blobs and bricks, each more mysterious than the last. Some are coated in ash, one appears to be growing herbs, another is wrapped in bark, possibly for flavor, possibly to restrain it. You approach cautiously, eyeing a cheese that looks like it might hiss if provoked. "What's this one?" you ask, pointing. "Ah," he says, stroking the rind like a beloved cat. "That's St. Agatha's Mercy, a washed rind cow's milk, matured in brine and aged with time in a damp cellar once used to store confessions." You blink. "Is it safe?" He shrugs. "Mostly." One mainstream historical fact: medieval Europeans sometimes named cheeses after saints or relics, believing them to offer not only sustenance but protection. In parts of France, cheeses were left to mature in monasteries under the watchful eye of cloistered monks who swore their curds were blessed by divine fermentation. You sample a sliver of St. Agatha's Mercy. It's aggressive, salty. It punches you in the back of the throat with the force of a theological argument. Your eyes water. You nod appreciatively, trying to look like someone used to surviving ecclesiastical dairy. Nearby, another vendor calls out. He's selling sheep's cheese rolled in crushed rose petals and honey. It sounds romantic, but the smell tells another story, one involving livestock, heartbreak, and a slight fermentation mishap. You pass. As you meander through the market, a small crowd gathers near a barrel. It's a cheese rolling contest, the kind where villagers chase a bouncing wheel downhill, risking life and dignity for the chance to win more cheese. You briefly consider joining, but remember last year's incident when someone dislocated a shoulder for a moldy round the size of a cabbage. You quietly back away. Instead, you observe a curious display: tiny molded cheeses shaped like animals, pigs, doves, a lion mid-roar. A local artisan explains that these are celebration cheeses used during feasts and religious festivals, sometimes given as gifts, sometimes consumed, sometimes hoarded like emotional support dairy. Historians still debate whether these figurines were primarily artistic expressions or simply a fun way to make cheese less terrifying for children. You purchase a small dove-shaped cheese for good luck. It smells benign, and its eyes, two tiny cloves, give it an oddly knowing expression. Back at the cheesemonger's cart, he's telling the tale of the midnight cheese, a legend from the north, where villagers believed that a certain cheese, if left out at midnight, would whisper secrets to whoever listened. Some claimed it predicted the weather, others said it knew who was having an affair. A few poor souls supposedly went mad from its revelations. You raise an eyebrow. The cheesemonger merely taps his nose and says, "Some cheeses aren't meant for daylight." As the day wears on, you snack quietly in the shadow of a chapel, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs and considering your growing collection of cheese. You now have 4 wedges in your bag, each wrapped with care, each with a smell profile best described as challenging. You think about how cheese in its essence is transformation. Milk turned by time, by bacteria, by human faith in the unseen. It's a gamble, controlled rot, if we're being honest. And yet it's revered, feared, loved, blamed. A bit like people, really. The bells toll for evening mass, and you head back to the road, passing vendors packing up and arguing over whose cheese made a dog faint. You clutch your satchel tighter, both comforted and unnerved by the warmth radiating from within. The walk home is slower. The sky has turned that deep violet blue that signals sleep isn't far off. The wind carries hints of straw, wood smoke, and just a trace of camembert. By the time you reach your door, night has fallen. You place your new cheeses on the table, each a little mystery waiting to be unwrapped. The dove stares at you. You nod politely. Tomorrow you'll taste them. For now you tuck them in with a cloth, and whisper a small prayer to Saint Lactobacillus, protector of bold stomachs and questionable life choices. You wake up to a house filled with the gentle musk of semi-soft fermentation. It's not unpleasant, exactly, just assertive, like someone whispering fermented poetry directly into your sinuses. Your dove-shaped cheese seems to have shuffled ever so slightly in the night, though that might be your imagination. Still, you blink at it. Hard, just to be sure. Today, the agenda is straightforward. Survive breakfast, avoid poisoning yourself, and finally figure out how to properly store cheese before it becomes sentient. You grab a knife, cut a small corner from St. Agatha's Mercy, and brace for impact. It's not so much a flavor as it is a theological debate held inside your mouth. Still, you chew dutifully, determined to develop what the merchants call a refined palate, or at least the digestive resilience of a desperate raccoon. The kitchen's cold. Your breath fogs the air as you tidy your cheeses and set them by the window. It's what the traveling vendor suggested. Let the cool morning air bless them, he'd said. Or maybe he just wanted to get the smell out of his cart. You're starting to understand that medieval cheese culture wasn't just about flavor, it was about faith. You had to believe this slimy, sweating wheel of dairy wouldn't kill you, even as it hissed slightly when cut too deep. You also begin to appreciate how much effort went into preserving these suspicious delights before refrigeration existed. Salt, ash, smoke, time, all used to slow down decay without paradoxically stopping it. Cheese, after all, is decay harnessed just enough to be edible, hopefully. One mainstream historical fact: salt was essential for cheese preservation, not only to prevent spoilage but also to draw out moisture and create a hostile environment for the really unpleasant microbes. Cheese wasn't just a treat, it was survival insurance, especially in colder months when fresh food was scarce and root cellars were basically damp holes with raccoon squatters. To deepen your understanding, you decide to visit Brother Anselm at the nearby abbey. He's the local authority on monastic cheese making, having spent the last 30 years perfecting a method that uses goat's milk, nettles and divine patience, which probably means mold. You trek the short path through the woods, the trees overhead whispering secrets in a language made entirely of creaks. A fox darts past with something dangling from its mouth, possibly a mouse, possibly a discarded cheese rind. Hard to tell from this distance. You nod in respect either way. The abbey is serene, stone walls draped with ivy, the heavy wooden doors open just enough to welcome you in. Brother Anselm greets you in the courtyard, hands covered in a mysterious crust. Making cheese, he says cheerfully, which answers nothing and somehow everything. He invites you into the dairy cellars. It's cooler here, damp but clean, with rows of shelves holding wheels of cheese at various stages of metamorphosis. Some are smooth, others are pockmarked. One looks like it could host a successful ecosystem. Each cheese, he says, has a spirit. You nod solemnly, unsure whether he means this metaphorically or if one of these rinds is genuinely haunted. Historians still argue whether medieval monks saw their cheese-making as a spiritual ritual or simply a practical necessity adorned with religious symbolism. You glance at a particularly moldy wheel and feel slightly blessed and cursed at once. Brother Anselm explains that storing cheese was a seasonal art. In winter, cheeses were moved to the coldest rooms, sometimes buried in straw to keep the temperature stable and discourage spoilage. In warmer months, cellars were used to maintain humidity and avoid drying out the rinds. Some monasteries even suspended cheese from the rafters in cloth bundles, like sleeping rodents of divine dairy. He hands you a wheel wrapped in herbs and bound with wax-dipped twine. It smells stable, like a forest after rain, if that forest was made entirely of goats. Take this, he says, it should age well in your home, if your home listens. You don't know what that means, you don't ask. As you make your way home, cradling your new cheese like a newborn with questionable genetics, you reflect on how cheese wasn't just stored, it was monitored, worshipped, feared. In some villages, cheese was buried in the walls to ward off evil spirits. In others, it was hung over doorways during childbirth to ensure strength and firmness of character. You're pretty sure some of that was just superstition, but then again, you're carrying a wheel of cheese wrapped like a spellbook. Back in your home, you clear a shelf near the hearth, not too warm, not too cold, just dry enough. You place the new cheese there, angled toward the window like it's sunbathing. You resist the urge to bow. Dinner is simple: a slab of bread, a smear of butter, and just enough cheese to threaten your intestines without declaring war. You chew thoughtfully, remembering the stories Brother Anselm told, about how once during a famine, the monks survived solely on cheese and prayer, and about how one particularly unruly wheel was found slowly crawling across the cellar floor, presumably in search of absolution or vengeance. You laugh softly, alone with your meal and your increasingly vocal cheese. It gurgles slightly as the room warms, a contented sigh, a warning, hard to say. As the candles burn low, you scribble some notes in your ledger. Cheese does not like sun. Cheese enjoys Gregorian chants. Cheese possibly speaks Latin. You don't know what you're becoming, exactly, but you're definitely becoming something. You curl into bed as the wind rattles the shutters, your cheese gently sweating beside the hearth, your dreams softly fermented by all you've seen, all you've tasted, and the creeping suspicion that your breakfast may be planning a rebellion. You wake up at dawn to the familiar funky perfume of slowly aging dairy and the faint rustle of something, not quite animal, not quite wind. It might just be your cheese expanding in confidence. It's been about a week since you brought home Brother Anselm's wax-bound wheel, and you're starting to suspect it's either growing in wisdom or plotting an escape. Today is market day, and you need supplies: salt, clean linens, more wax, and possibly a small bell for St. Agatha's Mercy, which has begun making noises during the night. You figure if it's going to moan like a ghost, it might as well have a bell to ring too. The village square is alive with motion. Wooden carts rattle over the cobblestones, vendors shout about turnips and trout, and somewhere in the background a child is definitely crying about something sticky. You make your way to old Gervais, the salt merchant, whose stall always smells like the sea and regret. Gervais leans in close as you mention your cheese preservation plans. You need grey salt, he says, pulling out a dusty cloth bundle, aged with thyme and a little ash, keeps the cheese quiet. You don't ask what quiet means in this context. You just nod solemnly and give him 3 copper coins and a leftover apple core, which he accepts with surprisingly little negotiation. You wander to the cloth vendor next. She sells cheesecloth so fine it could pass for royal handkerchiefs. Soft on the rinds, she says, but firm enough to keep the worms out. That seems like a reasonable standard for anything in life, really. One mainstream historical fact in medieval marketplaces: salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a precious commodity, often traded weight for weight with silver. The term salary actually stems from salarium, a Roman allowance to soldiers for buying salt. So yes, you're technically investing in high-value security for your cheese. Armed with supplies, you return home and begin your next project: building a semi-reputable cheese cabinet. You repurpose an old cupboard from your aunt's estate, one she used to keep dried lavender and angry letters from her sister. You scrub it clean, line it with straw, and hang a small carved cross inside, just in case. As you gently wrap your older cheeses in the new cloth, you notice the St. Agatha wheel has developed what you'll call a distinctive crust. It crackles slightly under your fingers like the surface of a long-forgotten planet. You re-wrap it tightly, then whisper a soft apology. It feels like the right thing to do. You place the cheeses in the cabinet by age and temperament. The goat cheeses go on the higher shelves where it's cooler. The cow's milk wheels rest below, surrounded by salt jars. The St. Agatha gets its own corner. You leave the small bell beside it, just in case communication becomes necessary. As you work, you remember what Brother Anselm said about the care of cheese reflecting the care of the soul. If you neglect your cheese, he said, you invite rot, and soon you won't know where the decay began, inside or out. Historians still argue whether monks actually believed this, or if they simply used it as a motivational speech to get younger brothers to clean the cellars. You pause for lunch: a piece of rye bread, a smear of horseradish, and a cautious flake of the goat cheese from the top shelf. It's sharp, surprisingly floral, with a texture like wet sandstone. You nod, chewing slowly, realizing that you've started to enjoy the weirdness of it all. That's either growth or surrender. By afternoon you're ready for the final step: waxing the younger wheels. You melt beeswax over the hearth. The smell sweet and smoky. One by one you dip the wheels, rotating them carefully to coat each crevice. The wax cools into a smooth shell like armor against time. You place them in the darkest part of the cabinet, where even the Saint Agatha can't glare at them. As the wax sets, you write small labels on parchment, dates, milk type, mood. For the newest goat cheese, made under a thunderstorm, possibly cursed, smells faintly of dandelions. You tuck the label under its cloth like a blessing. That evening the wind picks up, and you feel a storm rolling in from the north. You light a few candles, stir the embers of the hearth, and sit with your cabinet of cheese like a medieval librarian guarding ancient scrolls. You think about how each wheel tells a story, not just of its flavor, but of its journey. From raw milk to curd to brine to rind, each a quiet miracle. There's a knock at the door. It's your neighbor, Elric, holding something wrapped in a wool scarf. "Found this in my cellar," he says. "Wasn't sure if it's cheese or a fossil. Figured you'd know." You take the bundle, unwrapping it gently to reveal what looks like a fossilized wheel of hard sheep's milk cheese, covered in a crust of mineral flakes and spite. You press your thumb into it. It doesn't budge. "I think it's still good," Elric offers. "Or cursed." You thank him, add it to your cabinet with the others, and label it sheep's milk. Year unknown. Gift from Elric. Possible evil intent. That night, as the storm howls and the candlelight flickers, your cheese rests behind the cabinet doors like a silent choir, each one aging in peace, or in rebellion, but always together. You sleep easily, wrapped in the slow comfort of fermentation. Tomorrow, you might try your hand at soft cheese, or maybe build a second cabinet, or maybe nothing at all. Some nights it's enough just to know your cheese is safe, or at least contained, and if Saint Agatha rings her bell, well, you'll deal with that then. You awaken slowly, still nestled in the soft embrace of your straw mattress, the dawn light barely seeping through the thin curtains. Outside, the village is beginning to stir, but your mind is tangled with the overnight thoughts of cheese and the curious companionship it has become. After all, who else but a medieval cheesemaker would find solace in the silent company of waxed dairy wheels? Today you decide to experiment with something new, a soft cheese which you've heard monks say was the essence of patience. It requires more attention than the hard wheels. More care, more watching, more hoping that your creation doesn't turn into a biohazard or a new species of mold. You gather fresh milk from your neighbor's goats, silky white and cold against your palms. The goats are noisy this morning, bleating about their breakfast and their place in the universe, or at least the barnyard hierarchy. You shake your head and head to the hearth, ready for the delicate alchemy of cheese making. The process is slow, almost ritualistic. You heat the milk gently, barely above a whisper of warmth. Then you add the rennet, that strange enzyme harvested from calf stomachs which turns milk into something curdled and wondrous. You stir carefully, mindful of every fold and bubble. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Medieval cheesemakers often guarded their rennet recipes jealously, believing the precise source and timing could transform a humble batch into a divine delicacy or a disgusting disaster. Sometimes they used herbs or spices or even the odd crab claw to tweak the flavor. Historians still argue whether these eccentric additions were real or just market myths spun to sell more cheese. As the curds begin to separate from the whey, you strain them through your precious cheesecloth, watching the pale curds clump softly like clouds gathering before a storm. You press them gently into molds, round wooden hoops that have been passed down from an old cheesemaster whose name has long since faded but whose touch lingers in every groove. While waiting for the cheese to set, you wander outside and pause by the herb garden. You pick a sprig of thyme and some lavender, remembering your merchant's advice about salt mixed with herbs. The air is rich with the scent of earth and promise. It's a quiet morning but full of unseen life, buzzing bees and creeping vines. Back inside, the soft cheese is beginning to take shape. You sprinkle it lightly with your salted herb blend and carefully wrap it in the cheesecloth, tying it with linen strips. You place it in a cool spot in your newly fashioned cabinet, feeling a rush of pride. This one is fragile like a newborn lamb, and you know it needs more attention than your hard waxed companions. You settle down with a cup of watered down mead, the sweet warmth trickling down your throat like a medieval hug. As you sip, you reflect on the quirks of medieval cheese culture. In some regions they'd hang their cheeses in caves to age in the cool damp shadows, in others they'd bury them in straw and ash. Some monasteries even had secret cheese vaults guarded by monks sworn to silence, though whether these were to protect the cheese or the monks themselves remains a subject historians still debate. Meanwhile, your soft cheese develops a slight bloom on its surface, a fuzzy white layer that looks like tiny clouds hugging the rind. This is a good sign. You gently turn it, whispering a soft encouragement. It's strange how you've come to treat these cheeses like living things, but in this slow medieval life you've learned that patience and care often translate to survival, both of cheese and soul. Outside, the village bell rings, calling the faithful to morning prayer. You glance at your cheeses, both hard and soft, and smile. You've come a long way from the uncertain wheel you first acquired. Now, you're a guardian of flavors, a keeper of secrets wrapped in cloth and wax. You pick up your tools to clean and prepare for the next batch, already imagining what future cheeses might taste like, smoky, nutty, or perhaps something daringly pungent. For now though, you let the soft cheese rest, protected and cherished, like a secret tucked away in a parchment scroll. And in this slow, sweet rhythm of medieval life you find peace, an unexpected peace, born not just from survival but from the art of making cheese without dying from it. Time passes as it always does in the Middle Ages, not with the rush of clocks and schedules, but with the gentler tick of seasons and sunlight. You grow used to the rhythm of cheese. Each morning begins with a check of your wheels and rounds. Each evening closes with the slow, contemplative act of wiping mold from a rind or turning a cheese gently like a sleeping cat. The weather turns warmer. The smell in your aging cabinet turns interesting, strong, assertive. You begin to understand the saying that a good cheese smells like the feet of a saint who's walked to Rome. It's not exactly appetizing, but in these times flavor comes with risk. That's just the price you pay to not die from cheese. One day you notice that the soft cheese has developed an alarming orange hue. You lean in, sniff, recoil, lean in again. It smells fine, sort of earthy, mushroomy, with a hint of livestock, not deadly. Probably. You nibble a tiny corner. It tingles your tongue. You wait. 1 hour. 2. No death. You sigh with relief. Here's a mainstream historical fact to chew on with your funky cheese bite. In 14th century France, certain soft cheeses became prized for their smell alone. Nobles would pay extra for the stinkiest rounds. Historians still argue whether this was due to genuine taste preferences or a strange status competition, like who could wear the most layers in summer or host the deadliest banquet. But there's something else creeping into your little cheese haven, a threat that no wheel of wax or curd of goat can fend off. You see it first on your neighbor's thatched roof. A rat, then 2, then a wave of twitchy noses and scurrying paws. Rats, plague bearers, cheese nibblers, chaos incarnate. You run to your cupboard, throw open the doors and check your stash. The hard wheels are safe, high on the top shelf. The soft ones not so lucky. A few have tiny nibbles. One has a full rat-sized scoop missing. You stare in horror, and your stomach twists, not from illness but from betrayal. You had named that cheese. You had sung to it. You begin fortifying your cabinet, adding iron hinges, stones, and even a few leftover fish bones to repel the furry invaders. At night you sleep with your dagger under your pillow, not for bandits but in case a rat tries to sneak a midnight snack. To lift your spirits, you try your hand at a new technique you heard from a traveling spice peddler, smoking the cheese. Not metaphorically, literally. You build a small smokehouse with damp wood and herbs, place your half-formed wheels inside, and let the smoke curl gently around them like ghostly fingers. The result? Surprisingly pleasant. the cheese takes on a deep, rich flavor, smoky, earthy, slightly medicinal. You imagine a future where cheese isn't just preserved to survive, but crafted to be enjoyed, to impress, to dare you dream. Export. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval Scandinavia, people believed that smoking cheese not only preserved it but also imbued it with spiritual resistance. Against what? That was less clear. Evil spirits, perhaps, or lactose intolerance. Historians still argue whether such practices were religious rituals or just well-marketed food trends. You now keep a small collection of smoky rounds in a special rack above your hearth. Every few days you add thyme or juniper to the fire to see how it affects the flavor. Cheese making has become not just survival, but a game, a pursuit, a kind of edible poetry. Your neighbors start to notice. Old Gertrude from across the lane sniffs the air one morning and remarks that your house smells better than the monastery kitchen. A compliment, surely, even if monastery kitchens are mostly known for fish, gruel, and the occasional roast hedgehog. Soon folks start trading with you. A wedge of smoked goat cheese for some barley, a soft bloomy round for a pouch of dried apples. Word spreads. You are, inexplicably, becoming a cheesemonger, not by title, but by fate. You build a second cabinet, then a third, each one sturdier than the last. Your cheeses now age in relative safety, above rats, beneath herbs, surrounded by good intentions. You sleep better, knowing your rounds are tucked in like precious children. But you're not naive. You know cheese can still turn on you, go bad, go rogue. You cut one open and it hisses. Another leaks greenish fluid. One wheel is covered in tiny, perfectly symmetrical holes, and you don't remember making Swiss. You bury that one quietly in the garden, and promise never to speak of it again. Still, most of your cheeses are fine, more than fine. You cut into one, and it smells like warm butter and hay. Another tastes of walnuts and firewood. You savor a slice as you sit under a late spring sun, feeling strangely accomplished. It's not glamorous, it's not glorious. But here in this dusty medieval village, you have carved out something that feels almost modern, a passion project, a tiny fermented rebellion against chaos. And in the act of perfecting your cheeses, you've also perfected something else, an ancient humble form of happiness. You look at your cheese-laden shelf and smile. No one's died yet. Your cheese empire, if a few smoky wheels and a rat-resistant cupboard can be called such, is thriving. The village has started referring to you with something nearing affection. That one with the cheese, the mouldy wizard, even his crumbliness which you secretly like. You've moved from mere survival to quiet culinary dominance, and in a world where dinner is often indistinguishable from prison rations, your rounds are starting to feel like little miracles. You experiment further. What if you press dried herbs into the rind? What if you wrap a young cheese in fig leaves? What if just once you try washing the rind with ale instead of brine? This last one is pungent, but weirdly good. The cheese comes out with a sticky orangish crust and a taste that somehow combines barnyard and beer hall. It tingles, it lingers, it offends the nostrils and intrigues the tongue. You try a bite with bread, then without, then with again just to be sure. You declare it a masterpiece and name it, oops. Here's your mainstream historical morsel. Washed rind cheeses like Munster and Limburger trace their origins to medieval monastic communities in the Alps and northern France, where monks would wash cheeses in ale or wine as an act of both preservation and penance. Historians still argue whether the wash was mainly hygienic, symbolic, or a passive-aggressive prank on the next monk in line. You now have a small notebook. Well, it's actually a reused parchment from a failed fish drying business, where you jot down your cheese experiments. You draw little symbols. A squiggly line means too runny. A goat's head means pleasantly tart. A tiny rat sketch with an X means compromised by nibbling, may contain betrayal. Still, the rat problem hasn't gone away completely. You catch one lounging inside your smoke cabinet like it owns the place. It squeaks at you lazily and continues nibbling. You remove it with the sort of weary dignity only a seasoned cheesemaker can muster. To help you adopt a cat, or rather, a cat adopts you. It shows up one morning, all bones and boredom, and starts sleeping in your curing room. You name it Mimolette. It doesn't like people, but it really likes the smell of your rinds. Within a week, the rat problem decreases. Within 2, Mimolette has become a fixture. And in another week, someone wants to buy your cheese. Not just barter, actual coin, silver. It's the merchant from the next town over. He heard about the smoky rounds that don't kill you, and he's willing to take a chance. You feel proud, then terrified, then proud again. You wrap the cheese carefully in linen, tie it with twine, and say a silent prayer to Saint Bridget, patron of dairymaids. This is where things get serious. You start measuring things more carefully, keeping better notes, timing your brining, watching your temperatures. You carve a little sundial outside your hut, and use it to track aging times. You're becoming professional. Of course, success invites scrutiny. A neighbor begins sniffing around, asking what unnatural things you put in your cheeses. Someone else suggests your rounds are bewitched, since no one gets sick, and that's suspicious. You respond by handing out free samples. Once they taste it, the suspicion usually turns into chewing. Here's a fun fringe fact for your sleepy brain. In some areas of medieval Italy, cheese was accused of sorcery, not because it did harm, but because it didn't. If a cheese lasted too long without spoiling, or cured in an oddly beautiful way, some believed it had been touched by unnatural forces. Historians still argue whether these accusations stemmed from jealousy, genuine superstition, or just a deep mistrust of good news. Still, your reputation grows. A traveling friar tastes a bit of your oops and actually tears up. He says it reminds him of something holy, then eats half the wheel in silence. A tax collector asks if he can buy a round for his wife. You say yes, then spend the night worrying if he'll accuse you of bribery. You try to stay humble. You still scrub your curing racks, still chase away the occasional insect, still whisper kind words to your goat, and every once in a while you mess up. One cheese collapses into goo, another grows a rind so thick you need a chisel, but you keep going. And with each new round you feel less like someone trying not to die from cheese, and more like someone shaping it, taming it, conversing with it. Your hands know the weight of a good wheel now. Your nose can detect the difference between ready and run. Your tongue has become a compass for curd and cream. People begin coming to you with cheese questions. Why did this one go sour? Why did that one crack? What's the white fuzz on top? You answer patiently, feeling strangely priest-like, as if cheese has become your doctrine. You start thinking about bigger things. Could you train someone? Could you teach others? Could you export? That last idea makes you laugh. The roads are terrible. Bandits love soft goods. And let's be honest, cheese has a way of melting into a puddle if stared at the wrong way. But still the thought lingers, and so you keep refining, adjusting your salt levels, using cleaner water, tweaking the humidity with hanging herbs. Sometimes you just sit in your curing room and breathe, letting the scent of milk and mold wrap around you like an old blanket. This, you realize, is not what you thought survival would look like. You thought it would be about fire and spears and hiding in ditches. But survival here and now is a wheel of goat cheese that sings when you cut into it. It's the quiet click of a cupboard latch, the soft purring of mimolette curled beside the brine vat. It's life-shaped, salted and aged, and it's yours. You're up before dawn now, not out of necessity but out of habit, a rhythm set by curds and culture. The morning mist hangs thick over the fields, and your hands, already accustomed to the shape of wooden pails, move with quiet purpose. You no longer wonder whether you'll survive. Instead, you wonder how long your current batch of soft cheese will take to form a proper rind. You used ash this time, just a sprinkle, for science. The village has grown used to you, and in a way you've become a kind of strange local fixture, part curiosity, part craftsman, part alchemist. You're not quite sure how it happened, but your name has found its way to the local manor, and now you've been summoned. You don't own court clothes, you go in what you always wear: tunic, belt, boots, and the faint smell of something tangy and promising. The manor is too large, too clean, and smells suspiciously of lavender. You're shown into a long hall, where a minor noble, thin, prematurely balding, probably allergic to sunlight, awaits. He wants cheese, but not just any cheese. Something memorable, he says. For my daughter's wedding feast. You nod solemnly, as though this is an everyday request, though your internal monologue is screaming something closer to "what if it melts?" Back home, you sit cross-legged by your curing shelf, Mimolette perched on a beam above you. You're going to need something more elaborate than your usual rounds: more texture, more aroma, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of sweetness. Enter the dessert cheese. Mainstream fact of the day: in medieval Islamic and Byzantine territories, cheeses with honey, dates and spices were a well-known delicacy, though Western Europe mostly stuck to simpler, saltier varieties. Still, trade routes existed. Word traveled. Ideas fermented. You decide to push boundaries. You create a soft, mold-ripened wheel wrapped in dried rose petals and soaked for a day in a mead brine. It smells like a flower garden with secrets. You call it petal rot, though you wisely don't mention that name to the noble. The testing phase is intense. One batch collapses like an underbaked cake. Another forms blue veins where you expected white fluff. You scrape and re-salt. You pray, not for divine intervention, but for just one functional batch that doesn't taste like old laundry. Historians still argue whether medieval cheesemakers truly understood the microbiology behind their craft, or whether they just got very good at pretending they did. Based on your experience, the answer is pretending, but with flair. The final version of the cheese is oddly beautiful, soft, creamy inside with a delicate pinkish rind. You deliver it personally, riding with it in a wooden box cushioned by hay and nervous energy. The noble steward takes it, frowns, sniffs it, and disappears behind a velvet curtain. You wait, and wait. Then finally, the steward returns. The noble liked it. In fact, he loved it. He ate too much and had to sit down. You beam. You are paid not in silver this time, but gold. A small pouch of coin, heavy in your hand. You're a success. You tell no one. Well, almost no one. You do casually mention it to your goat. She looks unimpressed, but then again she usually does. Your mind starts whirring. If nobles are interested, maybe there's room for expansion. Not that you're trying to build a cheese empire, although now that the phrase crosses your mind, it has a certain ring to it. You begin experimenting with aging chambers. Your tiny hut is too humid. You dig a small root cellar, line it with clay tiles, and let it cool naturally. The temperature remains mostly stable, and the cheeses age more slowly. The texture improves. The flavor deepens. You call it cave time. That's not a joke. You genuinely call it that. A local baker hears about your operation and offers to trade his crustiest loaves for samples. You agree, and soon you're pairing sourdough with your firmer rounds. It's a match made in medieval heaven. And just when you think you've found a stable rhythm, a new challenge rolls in. Someone else has started making cheese in the next village over. You hear it from a traveling weaver, who says theirs isn't bad, actually. You pretend to be gracious, but internally you're plotting. This is your turf. You bled for this. Literally, you still have a gouge on your palm from that one time you dropped a vat lid. Naturally, you taste their cheese. It's decent, not exceptional. A little dry, but they have followers, supporters, even. Suddenly your cheese feels a little less magical, a little more ordinary, and just like that, doubt creeps in. You wonder if your early success was luck, if the noble's praise was genuine, if Mimolette is secretly judging you. Spoiler, she is. So you do what you always do when you're unsure. You go back to the basics. You heat the milk slowly. You stir by hand. You time the curds by watching the shadows on the wall. You hum to yourself, softly, not because you think the cheese can hear you, but because it helps. The quiet, the warmth, the familiarity, it all comes back. The next batch is one of your best. Fringe tidbit of the night. Some medieval cheesemakers believed the emotional state of the cheesemaker influenced the final product. If you were angry, the curds would sour. If you were joyful, the texture would bloom. Historians still argue whether this belief was symbolic, spiritual, or just a very convenient way to explain bad batches. You don't know if your emotions seep into your cheese, but you do know that when you make it slowly, carefully, kindly, it tastes like something worth waiting for. Word begins to spread again, not in trumpets and banners, but in whispers over market stalls and between merchants. Your cheese is different, reliable, comforting. People start asking for it by name, or rather by your nickname, the Brine Witch. You pretend to hate it, you secretly love it. The next time someone offers you silver, you smile and hand them 2 wheels instead of 1. Because deep down, you remember what it felt like to fear cheese. And now you've made peace with it. You've coaxed it into something edible, something artful, something alive. You still might die from cheese one day, but at least it'll be your own. Your fame grows whether you want it to or not. You don't do anything flashy, no heralds, no oversized wheels of cheese carted around on oxen, but word spreads like an overripe camembert on a hot day. People come not just for the taste, but for the story. The hermit in the hills who tamed cheese, who makes rounds that smell like mossy dreams and taste like the last good day of summer. You don't correct them, you don't encourage them either. You just keep stirring, pressing, aging, slowly, always slowly. This morning you wake up to a knock on your door, which is strange because your door doesn't usually receive visitors. It's a friar. His robes are dusty, his expression nervous, and he carries a little wooden box with wax seals on it. He explains that his monastery, quiet, well-meaning, and entirely too fond of hard bread, has fallen on tough times. Their old cheesemaker died, choked on a rind of all things, and they heard you were a miracle worker. Would you help? You're about to say no. And then he opens the box. Inside is a wedge of something ancient. You recognize it immediately. A monastery cheese, centuries in the making, with a washed rind that could clear your sinuses at 50 paces. It's beautiful, terrifying, probably alive. Mainstream fact time. Monastic cheeses, especially those from the Benedictine and Cistercian orders, were some of the most sophisticated of the medieval period. Washed rind techniques, carefully controlled environments, and even seasonal rituals all played a part in their development. Think of it like cheese made by monks who had too much time and just enough curiosity. You stare at the wedge, you sniff it, you hesitate, then you say yes, because somewhere deep inside you know this is the next chapter in your odorous journey. Plus you haven't been to a monastery in years, and the idea of cloistered silence and regular meals sounds kind of dreamy. The friar smiles. You pack your tools, your wire cutter, your brine cloths, your mystery jar of emergency mold, don't ask, and you set out. The monastery is nestled between cliffs and pine. It smells of wood smoke and candle wax. The kitchen is vast and slightly terrifying. The cheese room, however, is in shambles, shelves cracked, wheels tilted, humidity uncontrolled. You wince. This is going to be work. They give you a small room, a shared meal, and complete freedom in the cheese room. You accept like the benevolent wizard of whey you have become. Over the next few weeks you rebuild, slowly, always slowly. You start with the basics, repair the shelving, scrub the stone walls, fix the drainage channels. You train 2 young novices to stir without grimacing. You introduce them to the concept of listening to curds, not literally, but in that quiet, intuitive way only cheesemakers understand. You experiment with salt ratios. You adjust the humidity using bowls of water and tightly closed shutters. You draft a rudimentary schedule based on lunar phases, which impresses no one but makes you feel fancy. Fringe tidbit of the day: certain medieval monasteries aligned cheese aging cycles with religious calendars, curing certain wheels during Lent, others during Advent, and some not to be touched until Epiphany. Whether this was spiritual discipline or just very patient snacking is up for debate. Your first batch is a success. The second is a near disaster, but recoverable. The third earns you a silent nod from the abbot, which in monk terms is basically a standing ovation. You've settled into a rhythm now. The monks work quietly beside you, flipping wheels, checking rinds, murmuring prayers that feel oddly appropriate in the stillness. One even carves little crosses into the drying racks, not for decoration, but as he tells you, just to keep the mold holy. You try not to laugh, you fail. Then the noble comes, not your noble, a new one, from farther east. He brings a letter bearing the monastery's seal and a small velvet-lined box. He's heard of you. He wants your cheese, but not just for a feast this time, for a duel. You blink at him, slowly. A duel. Yes, he says. His opponent insulted his lineage at a banquet. They'll be facing off in 2 weeks. He wants to bring the most dangerous cheese in Christendom. Historians still argue whether this is a gross misinterpretation of chivalric tradition or just 2 guys with way too much time and dairy. But there it is. You accept the challenge. You age a wheel under constant humidity for 10 days. You wash it in ale. You spike it, just barely, with horseradish and dried mustard seeds. You wrap it in cured cabbage leaves. It smells like ambition and mild regret. You dub it the reckoning. You give it to the noble with a quiet good luck, and go back to your peaceful cheese cell. A week later you hear that both duelists tasted the cheese, agreed it was too powerful to eat in full, and resolved their conflict over wine instead. The cheese apparently now sits in the noble's study as a conversation piece and mild threat. You are satisfied. The monks start calling you Saint Curdo. You tell them to stop. They don't. But even amidst this newfound order and community, a part of you itches for solitude again. You miss your goats, your rickety bench, the familiar creak of your floorboards at night, the way your home always smelled like something was just about to be delicious. And so after one final batch, aged in peace and wrapped in nettles, you thank the monastery and head home. They send you off with quiet bows, a cured ham, and a wheel stamped with the abbot's blessing. Back in your hut, you exhale. The air is different here, wilder, more forgiving. Mimolette hops onto your table and butts your elbow with surprising force. She missed you, or she wants hay. It's hard to say. You light your fire. You unseal a round of petal rut. You cut a slice, sit on the floor and chew in silence. It's good, very good. You survived. Again. Days pass, then weeks, and you settle back into your rhythms with the contented sigh of someone who has seen the chaos of the world and politely declined a second helping. Life in your little hovel feels quieter now, not because the world has changed, but because you've learned to stir your curds without stirring trouble. You wake to the gentle tapping of raindrops on your thatched roof. You sip lukewarm herbal tea while waiting for the curd to separate. You press cheese by moonlight, whispering lullabies to the wheels because frankly they deserve a little affection too. One morning while turning a rather moody round of sheep's milk blue, you hear a sound that doesn't belong. A clatter, followed by muttering, then something heavy thudding against your door. You sigh, wipe your hands on your apron, and open it to find not a friar, not a noble, not a disgruntled peasant, but a boy, young, muddy, freckled and clutching a note sealed with wax and breadcrumbs. He's from the village down the slope. Their cheesemaker, a woman named Old Mathilde, known for her smoky Gouda and for swearing at children in 3 languages, has died. They want you to come, not permanently, just to teach, share some of your strange ways. You were hoping to spend this month aging in peace, but you agree anyway, maybe because you owe the world a little something, or maybe because you miss the sharp wit of someone like Mathilde. You pack light your mold cultures, a fine linen strainer, and your favorite stirring ladle, the one with the handle that looks like a goose. You leave Mimolette in charge, which mostly means you leave her extra hay. In the village, things are well basic. The dairy is under a lean-to, the milk is stored in barrels that look like they've seen more rain than use, and the young apprentice cheesemaker, Clara, is trying valiantly not to cry in front of you. Mainstream historical fact alert: villages in medieval Europe often relied on just one or two people to manage all communal dairy production. Cheese wasn't just food, it was survival. It could last through winters when everything else rotted or froze. A failed batch wasn't just disappointing, it was dangerous. Clara is trying to be Mathilde, she's not, but she's earnest. You like that. You start with warmth. Literally, you show her how to gauge the perfect temperature of milk without a thermometer, just by dipping a clean finger and trusting the way your skin hums. You demonstrate the slow stir, the waiting game, the patience of curd formation. She listens, she frowns, she gets it wrong, and then she gets it less wrong. Then suddenly, she gets it right. Fringe tidbit for the evening: one obscure Swiss text from the late 13th century suggests that cheesemakers would sing specific melodies to encourage ideal curd formation. Whether the milk listened is debatable, but Clara tries it anyway. Her goats seem unimpressed, but the curds behave. You help them rebuild their rennet supply, scraping stomach lining from a calf that had died naturally, drying it by fire, steeping it in sour whey. Clara nearly gags. You nod solemnly and remind her, the best cheese comes from the worst smells. She does not find this comforting. You also teach her the 3 sneeze rule. If the cheese makes you sneeze 3 times when you sniff it, it's either glorious or a disaster. Flip a coin. Your time there stretches from a few days to 2 weeks. You find yourself enjoying the simplicity, the firewood cracking, the arguments over salt ratios, the little girl who keeps sneaking pebbles into the drying room for reasons unknown. Still, not everything is calm. During one batch a wheel goes strange. Its rind weeps. It smells like boiled cabbage left in a church pew. Clara panics. The villagers murmur. You calm everyone with the same tone you'd use if someone had mistaken a hedgehog for a demon. Slow, kind, firm. Let it finish, you say. Sometimes cheese needs to scream a little before it sings. Historians still argue whether unusual cheese fermentations were understood as signs of divine intervention, curses, or just poor timing. Likely all 3, depending on how hungry the village was. Turns out the cheese is fine. More than fine. It's pungent, yes, but balanced. Rich. The rind forms a natural smoky crust, like Mathilde's old Gouda, but with a gentler soul. They name it Curdo's Ghost. You tell them that's excessive. They ignore you and start carving the name into the side of the aging room. You pack up once Clara can make a decent wheel without supervision, and only minimal crying. The villagers try to pay you in firewood and small terrifying dolls. You accept the firewood. Back home, the hut smells familiar again. Milk, hay, ash and something vaguely like sage. Mimolette has not eaten the curtains this time, which you take as a sign of her growth, or indigestion. You make tea. You press a small wheel of Gosling, your riff on Clara's Gouda. You write a letter to the monks, just to check in. You even draw a little cheese wearing a halo. It feels right, and then just as you're settling into bed with your feet warmed by a thick wool sock and a mild cheddar for company, you hear another knock at the door. Of course you do. You groan. You open it. It's not a friar this time, nor a noble, nor a child. It's a woman in strange traveling garb. Leather boots, a fur-lined hood, and a sack that smells unholy. She doesn't give a name, but she does give a smile. Wolfish, charming and tired. She's a trader. From the coast. She's heard rumors of a cheese that can withstand sea voyages without turning into sponge cake. She wants to know if it's true. You raise an eyebrow. She opens the sack. Inside a blue cheese. Green-veined, salt-cured, wrapped in waxed birch bark. It smells like ambition and the bottom of a ship. You exhale. Here we go again. You sit across from her, feet tucked under your stool, the blue cheese between you like some sacred artifact. It gleams slightly under the low firelight, its veins pulsing green like little rivers trapped in time. The bark wrapping has held, mostly. A few threads of mold attempt to escape around the edges, but they're the good kind, the kind you want mingling in your mouth late at night when you've convinced yourself just one more bite won't kill you. She calls it sea tongue, says it survived a journey across 2 rivers, a mountain pass, and the back end of a donkey who, judging by the smell, had firm opinions about dairy. You cut a wedge. Slowly, it fights you slightly, as if aware of its own legend. You taste. It's sharp, yes, but round, salty with a whisper of lavender. Your mouth tingles in a way that might be pleasure or danger. You swallow and nod. It's bold, she smirks, and profitable. Mainstream historical fact time. Long-distance trade of cheese was rare in the Middle Ages but not unheard of. Some hard cheeses, like Parmigiano Reggiano, were made specifically to endure travel. Portability made cheese a currency of sorts offered as tribute, payment or bribe. But a soft blue, that was madness. Delicious, sea-soaked madness. You ask how she kept it cool. She grins, taps the birch bark again. Turns out it was layered with dried kelp, absorbs the excess moisture, insulates against heat, and adds a faint umami tang. Who knew? Well, you say, chewing contemplatively, this is either a miracle or a recipe for civil unrest. Fringe tidbit. There's a Norse tale about a cursed cheese that once bitten caused the eater to speak only truths for a full moon cycle. That particular legend may have been born after a poorly aged wheel was consumed by an unfortunate chieftain during a wedding feast, but the concept sticks with you as you bite again. This cheese is too honest to ignore. You ask the traveler what she wants from you. Improvement, she says simply. Durability. Shelf life. Can you make it last longer without killing anyone important? You shrug. Define important. She doesn't laugh. Instead she rolls out a scroll, thick vellum, stained with oil, inked in what might be wine. On it trade routes, docks, markets, the kind of places cheese rarely dares travel. You study it, mostly to stall. It's ambitious. You ask why she doesn't just stick to dried fish like everyone else. Because fish don't make people happy, she says. Well, she's not wrong. You agree to help. She agrees to stay nearby and not burn anything down. The next weeks become a fevered game of balance. You push salt content higher. She winces. You try beeswax wrapping instead of bark, too sweaty. You attempt aging in an abandoned stone well. Interesting results, mildly haunted. Mimolette develops a taste for saltwater brine, and has to be gently dissuaded with a stern talk and extra oats. You call in Clara for a few days. She brings her cheerful anxiety and a surprisingly good batch of smoked curds. She also brings gossip. Apparently your last cheese was deemed holy by a visiting bishop, who then tripped over a chicken and denounced it again. Clara laughs about it all the way to your front gate. Back to experiments. You find that mixing cow's and sheep's milk adds stability. Adding dried nettle, not so much. One wheel grows something that whispers at night. You don't ask questions, you bury it near the hedge. Historians still argue whether blue cheese evolved by accident, via rogue mold spores in damp caves, or through deliberate risky cultivation. Either way, it remains one of the most misunderstood marvels of the medieval palate. Eventually, you land on something special, a soft blue, wrapped in oil-soaked linen, aged briefly in salt-lined crates, then sealed with beeswax mixed with crushed rosemary. The result, a cheese that survives a week in a cart, a week on a ship, and still makes you weep gently when paired with old bread and a sharp cider. You call it Wanderer's Mercy. She loves it. Word spreads, of course. Traders pass through, whispering about the mountain cheese that survived storms. Some say it glows in the dark. It does not. Others claim it repels rats. That one might be true. One noble sends a messenger requesting a wheel for his daughter's wedding. You send two, just in case the first one offends the groom's side of the family. You don't get rich, but you do get letters, scraps of parchment with smudged wax, each one describing where the cheese has gone, ports you'll never see, hands you'll never shake. In one, a sailor says your cheese kept him sane during a storm, like a friend who doesn't mind if you cry, and eat the whole thing alone. You keep that one under your pillow. The trader leaves eventually. She packs 12 wheels in a reinforced box with straw, leaves behind a coin that smells like fish, and promises to return with wine. You almost believe her. You return to your rhythm, firewood stacking, goat bribing, wheel turning. Clara visits sometimes, The villagers send notes shaped like cows, and Mimolette, in a rare display of affection, deposits a frog at your doorstep. You take it as a compliment. One night, under a moon so full it looks smug, you sit beside a half-aged wheel and realize something strange. You're no longer afraid of the cheese, not of the mold, not of the risk, not even of the death by curd that once felt so close, because through every mistake, every questionable rind, and every wheel that bubbled when it shouldn't have, you endured, and so did your cheese. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real art. You're standing ankle-deep in mud. Again, the summer rains have turned your aging shed into a cheese sauna, and while some would call that romantic, you mostly call it slippery. Mimolette stands on a dry patch, watching you with the mild disdain of a goat who believes she could run your entire operation better, if only she had thumbs. You're here to rotate the wheels, that sacred daily dance of mold and momentum. One wrong move, and a perfectly good wheel could collapse into what the local children now call sleepy pudding. And no, you don't want to talk about how they discovered that name. This batch is different though. You're trying something innovative. Inspired by a passing herbalist who traded you a bundle of moss for a slice of your rosemary-aged blue, you're now experimenting with moss-smoked cheese. Mainstream historical fact: smoke curing wasn't just for meats. In some regions of medieval Europe, cheese was lightly smoked using various regional woods and herbs, both for preservation and flavor. Alder, beech, and even juniper were used, sometimes intentionally, sometimes just because there was a fire and cheese happened to be in the way. You're using moss from the northern ridge. It smells like pine and secrets. The results are uncertain, but the wheel currently aging in the corner hums faintly when the rain hits the roof just right. That could be metaphorical, you hope. The new idea is simple: to make a cheese that evokes a memory, not just a taste but a whole place, something you can bite and be instantly transported to a mossy path or a smoky hearth, or that weird goose shed where you may or may not have had a vision once. You call it sentimentality in rind. You test a wedge with Clara. She pauses, squints and says, "It tastes like my grandmother's chimney in spring." That's not exactly what you were going for, but she finishes the slice, so you're taking it as a win. Quirky tidbit of the day: a 13th century Benedictine monk once attempted to age cheese inside a hollowed-out Bible to sanctify the spirit of the curd. It went poorly. The resulting wheel reportedly attracted wasps, sparked theological confusion, and led to a mild exorcism, but for a brief window it was the most sought-after cheese at the monastery. Meanwhile, back in your very mortal, slightly damp reality, a merchant arrives. He wears a cloak too clean to trust, and a ring too large for his fingers. He's heard of your cheese, he says, wants to distribute it in the capital. You laugh, just a little too long. He raises an eyebrow. "See, you've been here before. The seduction of scale, the myth of mass production. You tried once, remember? That time you sent a batch of soft sheep cheese with an over-eager mule driver who stored it next to pickled herring. The result smelled like betrayal and sadness. Your mailbox didn't stop smoking for a week. So you tell this merchant the truth. Your cheese isn't built for empires. It's built for evenings, for rain, for that quiet hum just before sleep. It doesn't scale, it dreams small on purpose." He blinks. "People want something dependable," he says. "Predictable." You smile. "Then they should eat turnips." He leaves baffled but unoffended. You wrap another wheel in linen, whisper a promise into the folds, not to protect it from spoilage, but to keep it exactly as it is, flawed, stubborn, alive. Historians still argue whether medieval cheesemakers considered themselves artisans or simply survivalists. Maybe they were both, artists of rot and curators of patience. You like to think they knew exactly what they were doing, even when they didn't. Especially when they didn't. That evening, as you sit near the fire, a small parade of villagers trickles by. They've brought gifts: honey, herbs, a lumpy jam whose color can only be described as perilous. They want to say thank you. For the cheese, yes, but also for the steadiness. In a season of too much rain, too little sun, and a goat who may or may not be a minor deity, your cheese became a kind of anchor. You don't know what to say, so you just cut slices and pass them around, one by one. No rush. The old miller says, "This one tastes like last summer." The butcher says, "This one tastes like regret, but in a good way." A child says, "This one tastes like secrets." And you bite. Close your eyes and taste silence. Not emptiness, but fullness without noise. A kind of peace you never expected to find in something fermented. Later, when the fire has dwindled to a flicker and even Mimolette is asleep, you stand in your cellar, lantern in hand. The wheels line the shelves like old friends, aging slowly, beautifully, without apology. And you think maybe this was never about not dying from cheese. Maybe it was about learning to live with it, to accept its dangers, its delights, its occasional tendency to grow hair. You run your fingers along a waxy rind, feel its breath under the skin, and you smile. The sky tonight is a blue so deep it almost hums. You step outside your cottage, the one that always smells faintly of ash and time and mystery, and look up past the crumbling chimney. Stars blink slowly overhead, like the sky is remembering something it forgot to tell you centuries ago. Back inside, the fire crackles low and lazy. The last wheel you flip today, wrapped in nettle, kissed with sea salt from that smug trader who claims to have met a mermaid, rests on the middle shelf. It will be ready in about 6 months, give or take a monsoon. But tonight you're not flipping wheels or dabbing mold. Tonight you're simply sitting, because after a life of trying not to die from cheese, you're finally allowed to rest a little. Let's be honest, you did more than survive. You learned the quiet alchemy of patience and decay. You turned milk and microbes into identity. You built tiny edible time machines. You tricked danger into flavor, and somewhere in all that you found something like meaning. Mainstream fact: by the late medieval period, some cheesemakers were revered, not just as tradespeople but as bearers of communal stability. In towns plagued by uncertainty, war, famine, plague, it wasn't the crown or the church that held people together. Sometimes it was the person who showed up every week with something nourishing, something aged, something oddly familiar. You were that person. The nobleman never quite understood it, but the baker did, the innkeeper, the weaver, even old Gregor with the extra toe and the cheese sensitivity, who, let's be real, still sneaks slices when he thinks no one's watching. They all knew what you did mattered. Quirky tidbit: there's a village legend about a wheel of cheese so perfectly aged it sang, literally, choir notes. Supposedly when cracked open, it harmonized in C minor and cured a bout of melancholy in the local baroness. Historians think it was probably an overripe brie, and some very creative wishful thinking. Still, there's something about a cheese that knows how to end on a good note. Back to you. You think about the long arc of your work, how you used to panic over curd temperature like it was a life or death situation, how you once buried a spoiled wheel in the orchard, held a tiny funeral, and wept for 5 minutes. It's funny now, mostly because you did the same thing with a completely healthy wheel once. You were just in a mood. The trees still bloom a little sweeter near that spot. Historians still argue whether cheese aging was more of a science or an art, but you've always known the truth. It's a relationship between time and bacteria, between rind and air, between you and something that will never thank you, but always reflects your care. And yes, okay, maybe between you and Mimolette, who continues to judge you even in sleep. Tonight you cut one last slice. The wheel is dusty with ash, firm but soft at the edges. You taste. It's like memory, and moss and endings. A child once asked you what your favorite cheese was. You said, the next one. You still mean it. Because the work never really ends. It just ages into something softer. The candle gutters. Outside, an owl calls twice. You stretch, your bones answering with their own sleepy creaks. The cellar is quiet. The danger has passed. The cheese remains. And so do you. Now, let's slow everything down. Let the tension melt like warm rind on a lazy afternoon. Picture your hands so tired from shaping, flipping, scrubbing, waiting, finally still, not in defeat, but in fulfillment. You've worked alongside time itself, wrestled life out of what could have been waste, and turned it into nourishment. And now, there's nothing left to chase. The wind brushes past the cottage door like an old friend stopping by just to say goodnight. The wheels in your cellar breathe quietly beneath their cloth wrappings, dreaming in mold and silence. Your feet rest against the flagstone, cool and steady. No more errands, no more experiments, no more wondering if that spot on the Gouda is friendly or plotting your demise. Breathe slowly now. Let your lungs stretch like linen left to dry under a quiet sun. Let your mind wander gently. No more cheese lords, or daring goats, or enthusiastic villagers with questionable jam. Just stillness, curling softly around you like steam from a warming bowl. You made it. Through storms, pests, questionable milk, and one extremely haunted brie. You made it. So close your eyes and rest. The cheese will keep, and so will you.